Welcome back to Don't Waste the Chaos, the podcast where we turn uncertainty into opportunity and business into something extraordinary. I'm your host, Kerri Roberts, and today we have a powerhouse guest whose career journey is nothing short of inspiring. Joining us is Jeff Turner, a CEO, an entrepreneur, and a leader who's helped reshape the insurance industry through innovation, growth, and strategic acquisitions. Jeff brings 29 years of deep experience spanning independent agency ownership, global brokerage leadership, and private equity-backed M&A ventures. Here's just a snapshot of his remarkable career. He had 17 years as an independent agent in Texas, where he built and then sold a successful agency. Spent 8 years at Willis Towers Watson, where he led North America's growth across 4 business segments. Then spent time as the CEO of Keystone Agency Partners, where I personally had the pleasure of working alongside Jeff, where he turned a startup into a top 20 U.S. acquirer, scaling over 200 million in revenues, 1,000 plus employees, and completing 53 acquisitions in just 3 years. It was wild. And now Jeff's got a new venture I can't wait to help you hear about today on the show. So in this episode, we're digging into the lessons Jeff has learned along the way, from evaluating potential acquisitions to integrating cultures, driving growth, and maximizing business valuations. So whether you're a business owner looking to prepare your company for sale, or someone interested in M&A strategies, or an insurance person in general, this conversation is packed with actionable insights. So let's dive in. Jeff, welcome to the pod.
Kerri, it's so good to see you. Thanks for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, I'm excited for this episode. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So your career spans Fortune 500 companies and leading major private equity-backed M&A firms. What kind of key lessons from those experiences has shaped how you approach acquiring and growing insurance industries and agencies today?
So I think that the thing that I learned most when I transitioned from local agency, the first 17 years of my career, to Willis at the time, moved to New York City, part of a big global broker. For a couple of months, I realized the core business is really the same. It's about individuals understanding a client's business at as deep a level as possible, and then putting a risk mitigation strategy in place that best serves that respective industry or sector. And it's the clients are usually larger at the global brokers, but the core principles of the business are the same. And so once I learned that, it made the process at Willis, whether it was sales in the first couple years of my career, or ultimately having a North American role leading growth over the 4 business segments after the merger with Towers Watson, it was trying to keep the principles of growth as simple as possible, to stay true to what the core of the business is. And it's what I said, it's understanding businesses, it's putting risk mitigation strategies in place that best protect that business. And certainly the larger clients are more dynamic, and the risk programs are a lot more complicated, but the core principles are the same. Willis taught me a lot about frameworks, scalability, what had to work across geographies. And it was, I feel like that in some ways, my first 7 years prepared me to relate ultimately to what I do today, what we did together at Keystone. It helped me relate to those ultimately agency owners. But Willis really taught me how to build a scaled business. But the lessons that I learned at Willis was to keep it simple. No matter how large a company grows, staying true to the principles of the business and letting all initiatives be as simple as possible and true to the core of that business is key.
Yeah, gosh, that's a really good point, and something I think a lot of people probably need to hear. We get things very much overcomplicated. So what has inspired you to transition from working with major corporations to founding your own M&A firm? And then what challenges did you face during those early stages during that transition time for you?
So I love the brokerage business. I mean, in 1995, when I entered the business, it didn't take me long to realize I had found the perfect place for me. I'm fascinated by companies, how meeting with CEOs, how understanding their goals and aspirations, how companies make money. And then in the insurance business, how to put, risk mitigation strategies in place that really protect that business. And so it is what, but and in transitioning from, it's what I did for 29 years, to an M&A firm. At Keystone, we really were an M&A company that happened to buy insurance agencies. At Crestfield Risk, the business that I'm a part of now, we're an insurance brokerage business that utilizes M&A as a primary source of growth, but we are not an M&A company. And I really believe that it may sound nuanced, but that was a biggest lesson learned from the Keystone experience for me, is that what I'm passionate about is the brokerage business. I want to use M&A to grow a business more rapidly than you can grow organically, and put the pieces together so the sum of the parts are truly greater. But it's building a brokerage business. And so M&A is the source of the growth and not the business in and of itself. And certainly you can make, I mean, I think that M&A businesses can be very profitable, but if the intent is to utilize M&A, I think it's important to not lose sight of the business that you're ultimately growing. If M&A is just a source of growth, well, then it's a part of the strategy. It doesn't encompass the whole strategy. And so at Crestfield, we're trying to stay true to that. We attempt to build the premier brokerage platform, and M&A will be our primary source of growth for probably a decade, but it's not our business.
Mm. That's a key differentiator. And you're right. It probably does sound like a nuance to someone who doesn't live in this world. But for somebody who's been in this world alongside you, I totally get what you're saying. That resonates. And you operate differently, right? Like the foundation, the answers to the questions, the direction. If you're an M&A firm, you're operating a certain way. But if you're a brokerage that uses M&A as a strategy, you're going to operate in a different way. You've got different key objectives and different driving factors. So that's really good. I hope when agencies are making decisions on what partner they want to come alongside them, they should listen to that piece, because the driving factors are completely different. And one of them is a good fit for everyone. I mean, some of them, agencies will go either way, but that's really good. I'm glad you clarified that. So, when acquiring an insurance agency, what are the top 3 factors you use to evaluate to determine whether it's a worthwhile investment for you?
So I think I mean, obviously you and I both have been part of growing insurance brokerage businesses. We did it together. You did it before. We worked together. But I think the principles that make an acquisition target really valuable are the same. And it starts with leadership, and whatever the business, historic organic growth, and strong client retention. I think that those 3 things, leadership leads to strong cultures, healthy businesses grow, and effective businesses keep their clients. So I start with those 3 things as the filter to then dig in and really understand what the drivers are for the leadership, what drives organic growth, what leads to the client experience that ultimately drives retention. But it's those three things that then spin off multiple areas of diligence to make sure that the business is ultimately a fit. But it's those 3 things.
Yeah. So if you're an agency owner listening to this today and you're thinking, I'm interested in maybe being purchased at a wholesome or a percentage, those are things that if you can't answer those areas confidently, those would be good areas to be tackling right now to prepare yourself for the future, just if the potential's even there. And I would say, as somebody who's been a part of an agency who has sold and then part of firms that have acquired, in my opinion, if you're a business person, everything's for sale. I mean, that's just the way I
That's
like
right.
to look at it. I want to operate it like it's for sale, even if I never plan to sell it. I don't plan to sell my consulting firm. I'm in year 2. Like I don't have a plan to do that, but I run my processes as if someone's going to peek over my shoulder and look at all of it, because I want to be like the rock star in my business that I liked to be in other people's businesses. And I don't want someone else coming in and being like, what the heck was she up to? Or why did she think that was going to work? Or this wasn't sustainable. I try to run my business that way. And if you're running your business as a lifestyle business, you're not usually minding your P's and Q's and digging into that. So that's really good feedback. So what advice would you give to that business owner who's considering acquiring another business or being acquired themselves? Where would they start?
Well, I think culture, I referenced that leadership leads to culture, but I think culture is probably the very first thing that any seller should consider. And really asking yourself the question, can you see yourself and your colleagues being a part of the firm you're considering to acquire you? I really think that I worked, those first 17 years, the first agency I worked for was certainly the most instrumental person in my life from an insurance perspective. But the second firm that I worked for, the CEO of that business had a had a test. It was every time they interviewed people, especially people for leadership roles, he had what's called a Thanksgiving test. And we've heard that probably mentioned in different ways, but it was, ultimately he told, all people in hiring positions is that if you can't see the person you're considering for a role sitting at your Thanksgiving table, then they shouldn't join our firm. That business has gone on. They're nearly $1 billion today. They've been a rapid acquirer, but he still deploys that test today. But I think for sellers, it's equally important. Can you see yourself being a part of that business for the long term? And if you can't, then it really doesn't matter what the economics of the deal are. It will ultimately either underperform or fail if the people don't fit. So culture's first. And then I would want to really understand long-term goals, and make sure that there's real alignment in that area. Sometimes it's in these, you're selling a business, easy to get enamored by the economics and the transaction. And it's pretty easy probably to marginalize what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years. But making sure those goals really align, I think, is critically important for the transaction ultimately be successful. And it's not just, for the people, the majority owners of the business, but it's for all their colleagues, because usually the colleagues are in the shadow of the leader. And so they've been attracted to be part of that selling business largely because of that leader. And so if the long-term goals aren't aligned there with the people, then it will ultimately be a marginalized transaction. And then again, long term is making sure the financial incentives are aligned for the long term. Again, easy. Most of these deals, you get some money up front, and then there's an earn out structure, usually 2 to 3 years. The initial business has to perform, and then you get paid some more money. But then after that date is kind of where the rubber meets the road, and making sure that financial incentives are aligned for the long term. I would really encourage sellers to dig in on that point and really make sure that it's a fit.
Yeah. And I would say you explaining those just reminds me of your style as a leader, because I would think, a lot of people might have heard me ask that question and they might have thought like, we're going to get into the money nitty gritty. And you start at that almost emotional connection, relational connection. And that's something I definitely saw in your leadership style. And I think that's because you look for longevity. And it's not a quick buck situation. You're trying to build something that matters and something that lasts. And so leading with that relationship aspect is huge. And you might take for granted that that's just the obvious answer, but you are very unique in that way, which I appreciate. It draws in the right people. And I love that you just kind of declare, this is what I'm looking for, because you're going to draw in the right people to you because of that. And a lot of leaders are not focused on the culture aspect at the beginning. So
Well, I just think that it's ultimately, you've got to do business with people, and so the people have to really work. There has to be a fit, and you can always work out the math, but if the people don't work, it's going to be a pretty miserable situation. And then ultimately, if you're the buyer, if you don't take the time to really qualify that the people are a fit, that they'll be good partners in a sense, kind of an overused word, but if they're not going to be good fit for the organization, well, then ultimately they're going to leave, especially like in the business that I'm in, and that it's led by entrepreneurial people. So those people, if there's not alignment, there's not a fit, then they'll leave and you go do it again or go join somebody else.
Yeah. There's certainly options out there. So you need to
That's
align with
right.
the right one that fits you. That's a good point. So what are the critical drivers that maximize valuation when selling a business?
So the key drivers for driving is that one, and I think that again, this is probably true. I mentioned this earlier, but I think sustained organic growth, whatever the business. I mean, certainly in the insurance brokerage business, demonstrating a history of organic growth is critical. Client retention, and then effectively being able to leverage scale. I mean, that's ultimately how you maximize valuation in these businesses that are heavily relying on M&A to grow. Is that you've got to sustain organic growth, you've got to have the revenue be sticky, and then you've got to have really effective strategies as you get scale, how to leverage that scale to the benefit of the organization, but ultimately also to find efficiencies that increase EBITDA or increase profit, because profits ultimately where value is created.
Yeah. So once they get in, let's kind of flip that. Once you acquire an agency, what strategies are you going to implement or would you have your team implement to drive growth and ensure long-term success for that agency?
Well, first, I think that to really understand what they do well already, and usually data it helps to really polarize what. Again, I'll focus on the insurance brokerage business because it's what I know, but data helps to really understand what agencies well. And I mean, in a lot of agencies they're led by great entrepreneurs, and they're highly relational businesses to some extent, and so. I mean, oftentimes agencies know that maybe there's an industry or a sector that they have a handful of clients in, but I've been a part of acquiring a bunch of these firms. When you really dig in, then you realize there's areas of concentration that maybe the agencies didn't even focus on. And so then you can really double down there and say, okay, well, if you're good with 20% of your client base, why don't we shift our target focus to do more of that because you already do it really well. And then secondly, I would say once we have a real clear understanding of what they do well, and try to create processes for, really, really doubling down on those areas, is then how do we augment that? And sometimes M&A is the best way to do that. I mean, maybe it's an industry sector that the agency provides that has been effective in providing some lines of business, but there's also an opportunity for other lines of business. Maybe it's, and again, in our business, property and casualty may be the focus, but maybe the industry sector they focus on has a lot of employees in that business. And so employee benefits would be a good fit. And so if that agency doesn't have a strong employee benefits practice, well, then usually it's more efficient to go acquire those capabilities rather than to build it. And so it's to look at how to deepen those areas of capability or areas of specialty, to to take advantage and capture more market share that's available from those clients. I'm a big believer that growth happens faster in areas of specialty rather than being a generalist. So helping agencies understand what they do well, and then augmenting and deepening their capabilities for that industry sector really drives growth. And then the third thing is, and this is something we do with every acquisition, is that have a really clear strategy for growth. And so obviously we go in actually and put strategies in place with every acquisition, certainly the larger acquisitions, and then we measure that progress. And then we routinely reevaluate the progression towards those strategic initiatives. And I think that, I think in life, we get what we focus on. And so by keeping the strategies for each acquisition in the forefront of people's minds, and then having great ways to measure and visibility around the progression of those goals, I think inherently helps people achieve them. And probably maybe it's not necessary to say, but keeping the goals really simple too. I think that for everyone, it's easier to achieve things that if it's clear what they are and it's simple. So make progress transparent, and then being willing to pivot if you hit roadblocks you're not achieving the strategic objectives. Be willing to pivot quickly to get on a better path to ultimately achieve the goals.
Yeah. Sounds like a decent amount of humility and strength all mixed in together. I loved what you said about we get what we focus on. That's huge. And I hear a lot of organizations not have a clear mission, vision, values, objectives. And so then they're wandering aimlessly through their year. And at the end of the year, there's not a whole lot to assess because it's like, what did we focus on? And therefore, what did we achieve? And, this episode is going to be airing in the next couple of weeks. So start of the year, and it's a perfect time if you're listening to hopefully inspire you to set strategic objectives for the year and then follow up on those. Look at them, I'd say monthly, but quarterly, biannually, and then annually reflecting on those and seeing what you accomplished, because I couldn't agree more. You definitely get what you focus on. And if you're focusing
Right.
all over the place, you'll probably get a little bit of everything, but
That's
nothing really
exactly
done
right.
well.
That's right.
So many listeners, maybe business owners looking to create a business that could one day sell. What key practices or strategies should they adopt to make their business attractive to buyers?
So and I really, obviously I keep saying my business is insurance, but I do think the principles are the same in all sectors, regardless of size. Is first, have a really clear vision of who you are and why you are different in your respective market. I think being able to have that elevator pitch crisp, like, this is who we are, this is why we do what we do, and this is why it's different. I think that's really important. And then a clear goal of what you want to achieve. And then, as we just said, and then measure the results. It's always a little bit surprising to me with some of these agencies that we meet, how few of them actually require goals of their salespeople. We call them producers in the insurance brokerage world, but it's like, that people tend to achieve certain amounts of new growth every year, and they just kind of rock along and they grow. But what I found is that sales discipline and really having a goal, making those goals again public, measure success, measure the progression of that goal, comparing results to other people in similar roles, I think is really clear. But it starts with having a really clear goal, and then being able to measure those results. And then I think that having an execution strategy, and this is probably more for a leadership team, but for the CEO or for a managing partner or who the leader of the firm, to have a really clear execution strategy of how they're going to achieve their goals and really clearly define the responsibilities of the team, I think is really critical, to be attractive to buyers. And then historic profitable growth, strong retention of clients. I've mentioned that. I think regardless of the industry, sticky revenue and profitable growth is evidence of a healthy organization that will ultimately drive value.
Yeah. There's several things that you said there that I could just like literally climb up on a soapbox and preach on. But when we're talking about producers, specifically in insurance, but in any sales organization, the very first agency I ever came into didn't have sales goals for their producers. And when as the COO, if I'm responsible for the budget year over year and I'm working with the controller, working on projections, what the hell are we projecting to if we don't have sales goals? Like, I just don't understand how we can even set ourselves up well for the next year. But when you're talking about leadership vision, that is a leadership issue. It's not a producer goal issue. It's like if the leadership doesn't have a goal of growing by 20% year over year or 30% or whatever, or then know what they would do with the funds if they reach that level, like are they trying to make tech investments or people investments or whatever, then of course there's not going to be any kind of trickle down objectives to whether
Right.
it's sales staff or support staff on what everyone's trying to accomplish. And all of the employee retention, whether they're 1099 or W-2 or commission or flat salary, hourly, whatever, if people don't understand how their role positively or negatively impacts the success of the business, how do they get motivated? And then as business leaders, we're all sitting around like, why can't we keep people? No one wants to work anymore, but it's a
Right.
leadership failure because when employees like know what they're working for, know what success looks like, know how they
Absolutely.
contribute to the bottom line, they're excited, they're pumped about being at work, or they're not and they realize they don't belong there. But it's definitely a leadership thing. I love that you pointed that out.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about private equity. I know a lot of people think that's a pretty sexy world to live in. You've worked with PE backing in your career. How does having private equity investors influence your process? And what should business owners know when they're dealing with PE firms or getting involved with that?
So obviously I have worked with PE and this was my second time to work for a private equity firm with Crestfield Risk. But the I learned a tremendous amount the first time and then spent a year taking those lessons learned and choosing who was going to be the PE sponsor for this next venture. And I think that a really important aspect of working PE. This is, I didn't know this at first, but I think it's really important when you decide to engage with a private equity firm, is that realizing that the private equity firm has a business to run and it's not yours. So there is really natural tension that comes up, and it can either be a struggle or it can be unifying when you realize they have a business to run and you're part of their business, but your business is not theirs. So it really makes alignment super, super important. I mean, it really makes it imperative. But alignment around strategy first and then financially. But I would say that financially is probably easier than strategy. Really making sure that the private equity firm that you're evaluating has a real clear understanding of what the management team strategy is, and then making sure there's alignment there. And then financial alignment, I think, is really, really critical. I mean, it is. And I mean, and get advice from friends who have been in the worked with private equity firms. I mean, there's a lot that I didn't know, frankly, and when we worked together, that that made that made things somewhat challenging at times with our firm because we weren't necessarily financially or strategically aligned. I frankly didn't know that but that both those were absolutely critical for that tension to not be disruptive, that natural tension I reference not to be disruptive. The third thing is that I would try to get a really clear understanding of how the PE firm works with management teams. And there's all different styles. And that sounds like a sort of a small point, but it's actually, I mean, every private equity firm sort of has a way that they engage with management firms and how they support them, how they help make decisions and understanding that. I would ask any PE firm that you're considering to talk to three CEOs of businesses that they are currently invested in, and at least one that they have exited. So you get a really clear picture of what it was like to work with that private equity firm. I mean, private equity firms, I mean, can be an absolute accelerator to strategic initiatives and to growth of the business. I mean, they're made up of super, super smart people. And when the alignment is right, and the style of working with management teams fits the leadership, I mean, really, really magical things can happen. Just got to get those things right. Strategy and financial alignment.
And I love saying that you should check out somebody that they don't work with anymore because you might hear that story and be like, oh, that's because you were a mess. It wasn't the PE firm, like
That's right.
just weeding out the issue. So one common challenge, and we've talked about the culture quite a bit, but one common challenge, of course, with inside of M&A and purchasing other organizations is that cultural integration. How do you ensure that the acquired agency's culture aligns with the firm's vision and the values?
So I think that you're right. It can be a challenge. I mean, it can be really challenging, and I think it really comes. Probably the most important principles are will have to be disciplined and patient in the evaluation process, sort of that goes into ultimately making the decision. And it sounds like, okay, well, sure, discipline and patience. But a lot of times, discipline and patience takes time that you don't think you really have to make the decision. And what I've learned is that if PE is buying you, they want to buy you more than you want to sell to them. So it is being disciplined, and I think it's easy to forget that, but finding great businesses to invest in. I mean, it is ultimately how private equity firms stay in business. And so kind of forcing the discipline and the patience to evaluate, is the culture really a fit, is time that you have as the seller agency. Transparency around objectives, I think, is really clear, really important, both for buyer and seller, because ultimately the transparency around the objectives, what the seller wants for their business ultimately, and what the buyer ultimately wants to achieve. I addressed that earlier. For the long term, that alignment is really critical, and ultimately it leads to effective integration. I mean, if the people aren't right, the integration is going to be tough, and the financial results that maybe be achieved with the ultimate cultural fit, will be somewhat muted.
And we took over running them. And so it was fairly simple. I mean, a few employee issues, but like we were replacing the leadership team. We were owner operators, if you will. But then when we sold our agency a majority share, we made the right choice with our purchaser when it came to, there were four other partners. When it came to their goals, for me personally, I was younger than all of the others on the executive team. And so I was looking for innovation and all of this opportunity. And it sounded like I was going to have that. And it was the right choice for the agency, the right partnership for the agency. But ultimately, I learned really quickly that I didn't fit that culture. And even though they had said like I was required to stay on for 2 years, I'm sure when I said I'd like to sell my shares and leave, they were probably like, good, because she's wearing us out. It just was an
Right.
obvious lack of culture fit. And it was nothing personal to them and nothing personal to me. It was just like not the right fit, not the right pace, not the right direction for both of us. And so I hope when agency owners or anybody who's thinking about selling is listening to this, you have to understand like when the boat is going and then you make a quick left turn, the people on the very back of the boat might fall off. Like not
Right.
everyone's going to make it. And you have to be prepared and think through who might not make this through and what are going to be the ramifications of that, and be willing, like if the money and the expedited growth or whatever your goals are, being able to purchase new tech, being more competitive in the space because you're adding other modalities, whatever it is, if that's worth it, then those other people will get picked up by somebody else. Like we just have to let that happen. But if it's not worth it, then you've got to reevaluate. So I think a lot of people start thinking about this because of the money. But then when it gets down to that alignment, it's very important. I mean, sure, the money is important, but there's a lot of money out there to be
That's right.
made and a lot of money to be had. And so thinking about that alignment is really huge. I'm glad you've got such a big focus on that. Let's talk about trends that you're seeing in the M&A space in general. Are there particular opportunities or challenges that business owners should be aware of in this space that you're seeing?
So I think that insurance brokerage I mean, there's some similarities in insurance brokerage probably to all sectors, but there has, but I think that what I'm hearing in other sectors, obviously I spend all of my time in insurance brokerage and speaking with investors that invest in insurance brokerage space, distribution specifically. But there's been a real shift over the last certainly 3 years, maybe even beginning 5 years ago, around integration and centralizing functions. And that's a similar theme probably in any sector, but and I think that, I mean, that is fine and it's certainly necessary. But I think that regardless of the sector that your business is in, but specifically insurance agencies should really make sure that the firm that they're considering to sell to we've talked about this, but aligns with their long-term interest, and that make sure that there's alignment for their people for the long term. I mean, I think understanding if ultimate buyers, which are typically PE firms, are there, or if they're focused on integration and centralization, well, what does that mean to your business? I mean, does your business effectively go away? And maybe that's okay. But if it's not okay, if you want there to be some preservation of the business that you build, if you want that to survive long term, then you've got to make sure that the integration and centralization efforts aren't unintentionally going to destroy what you have built. And I mean, there's a lot of buyers out there, and there can be thoughtful integration and centralization of functions without having to make everybody look exactly the same. And so I think, again, we've said this, but I almost can't emphasize enough. I mean, just the diligence around who you're choosing as an acquirer to sell to, understanding what their long-term goals, and certainly operation, how they create operational efficiencies due to the scale that's created through M&A, making sure there's alignment there is really important.
Yeah. So before we close, give me a little peek behind the curtain. Talk a little bit more about Crestfield and what Crestfield Risk is focused on right now, where you all are at, and kind of your goals for 2025.
So thank you. So we launched Crestfield Risk in May of this year, and it is, I referenced this a little bit at the beginning, but I mean, we are intent to build a premier insurance brokerage platform. It is, I mean, we want to, and certainly we will grow materially through M&A. But Crestfield, we will attempt to thread the needle between preserving the cultures and the identity of the large agencies that we acquire, but leverage what they do really well for the benefit of all agencies. So I mean, the real focus is that we will buy super high quality, those attributes I referenced, insurance agencies that have strong historic organic growth, great client retention, strong leadership, and with areas of specialty where they've served clients really well. That we will preserve what they've done great and the cultures they've built to their firm, but then we will institutionalize those areas of strength and make that available to the whole firm so that as we get bigger, everybody gets better. And so, I mean, truly the focus is the sum of the parts is better, is greater. And I mean, it's effectively building an interdependent firm. It's great businesses in and of themselves, but we'll rely on one another to get even better as we get bigger. And so we're off, we're, I guess, 5 months into this, 6 months into this, and we have two agencies, both under contract, under, letter of intent, and we'll close those probably somewhere in January to February. And so we'll go from, zero revenue of where we are today to nearly 100 million in revenue with just these two firms. So we're super excited about these two businesses. They're, made up of phenomenal leaders, great growth. They're both in the New York area, which wasn't by design, but it's great to have a concentration there. Really, really good at what they do and serving clients, and believe it'll be, really core to the foundation of what we build, of building a premier brokerage platform. So
That's
It's great.
exciting. And I
Yes.
love hearing, if you're somebody who's like, "Ooh, but I'd like to get involved in this M&A focused space." It's like, did you just hear him say go from 0 to 100 mil in a matter of a couple months? Now, there's been a lot of work in the background, but what an amazing way and a powerful way to scale. It's really, really exciting. I can't wait until you're able to announce who those agencies are that are a part of Crestfield Risk and see where this goes in the future. I'm really excited for you.
Thanks, Kerri. It's
Yeah.
super fun. It's really fun.
So how can people find you? How can people find Crestfield?
Crestfield.com.
Okay. Easy enough.
Yes, Crestfield.com. It's hopefully easy to remember.
And how can people connect with you personally?
jturner@crestfield.com is my email. And I mean, certainly I'm on LinkedIn. The business Crestfield Risk is on LinkedIn. So we're trying to be as present as possible as we get things going here. So I would
Yeah.
love to connect with any agencies that really the most fiercely independent agencies I would love to talk to see if I can capture the imagination of those agency owners of what could be possible together.
You know, looking for people who are fiercely independent to me only confident people can do that because you know how it is working with salespeople, especially fiercely independent salespeople. That says to me you've got a lot of confidence because that is going to bring challenge your way. And that's the exact type of person that I love partnering with is somebody who's fiercely independent because I am too. So we're speaking the same language. But I just can't wait to see who partners with you in the future. So anything else that you'd like to share with us before we wrap?
Kerri, thank you I always love getting the chance to see you. I'm certainly inspired by what you're building with your HR consulting firm, and I look forward to opportunities for us to stay connected and work together.
Yeah. Me too. Well, we know that business in general can be chaotic whether you're selling, whether you're owning. Business can be tough, but it can be very exhilarating. And I hope that as you've listened to this conversation between Jeff and I, you can feel the energy that both of us have and the passion that both of us have for businesses. And hearing from a person like Jeff, who's innovative and who just goes out there and gets it done and can build and then build again, is really exciting. And so if you've got that passion in you, I would say don't waste the chaos. Embrace it. Until next time.